there are a ton of real estate agents that have a pipeline of buyers and sellers that they were anticipating transacting with, and a certain percentage of those are not going to transact because of this war, because of where mortgage rates are, because of the geopolitical uncertainty. She said, if I wanted you to come out here and list my house, I would have called somebody else. I want to know what the cash offer is. So we made her a cash offer. I thought they would never accept it in a million years, and they did. Welcome back to the Agent Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Caffarella. Today, I want to talk about something that I deal with pretty much every day, which is the most common misunderstandings about working with sellers on fix and flips from agents. Now, before I get into that, you guys know this show is all about getting agents off the real estate roller coaster. And as I'm recording this today, March 31st, 2026, in the very beginning of what was expected to be a pretty exciting spring market, we are in the middle right now of a war with Iran. And I want to talk briefly about how that impacts the spring real estate market, but more importantly, why now more than ever, the message that I talk about all the time should resonate with you. So we know that going back to 2022, mortgage rates went way up. Now, not high necessarily by historical standards, but they went from in the threes to in the sevens. I think at one point in 2022, we actually hit in the eights. For this, call it 3.5 year period, real estate agents in general have been struggling. Transactions have been down. It is really, really tough right now. It's a tough market to be a real estate agent. Buyers are having a really tough time affording pretty much anything. I mean, prices are higher than they've ever been. Mortgage rates are not historically high, but they're high relative to the past 20 years. And when you combine the two, it's just really tough for the average buyer to buy a house. And people talk about buyer demand in terms of mortgage applications, and they talk about it in terms of like who's looking. But there's real demand for people that want to buy houses right now that we don't even see. There is tons of demand from people that can't afford to do anything right now. And you don't see that in mortgage applications. You don't necessarily see that in open houses. In addition to the fact that there are a ton, and I guarantee if you are a real estate agent in the market right now, you know a seller that wants to sell their property, but they can't afford to trade their 3% interest rate for a 6% interest rate if they sell and then buy. So since 2022, it's been extremely difficult for real estate agents. Of course, you know that that's what I teach and preach. I say, don't just rely on your traditional residential retail commissions. Invest. Okay, you know that message. But going into the spring of 2026, and I'm talking the end, maybe like November, December of 2025, there was a lot of optimism from myself included that this spring market might yield more transactions. This spring market might have slightly more affordable houses for buyers. And one of the reasons for that is that the mortgage rates dipped under 6% for a little bit. And it looked like the Federal Reserve was talking about maybe lowering interest rates a couple more times this year. The bond market was dipping. The spreads between the 10-year and the mortgage rates was lessening, providing us with rates that were lower than we've seen in a while. And in the beginning of 2026, I have been told from many people in my circle that people were getting rates in the mid fives or the high fives. Okay. All of a sudden, about 30 days ago, I believe it was right at the end of February, the United States started, airstrikes on Iran. Whether you agree with the war, disagree with the war, doesn't really matter. What matters is the impact that it's had thus far in what was expected to be by many a pretty busy spring market. Again, I thought it was going to be a pretty busy spring market. And as I'm recording this, right, it's only March 31st, 2026, as I'm recording this. So that doesn't mean I'm not predicting on what's going to happen. But what I am telling you is that there are a ton of real estate agents that have a pipeline of buyers and sellers that they were anticipating transacting with. And a certain percentage of those are not going to transact because of this war, because of where mortgage rates are, because of the geopolitical uncertainty. Okay. And I say all of that because there has never been a more important time in our lives to diversify away from just earning commission income. That is what being an agent investor is. Being an agent investor is not being just an agent. It's not being just an investor. It's also not about doing two separate things. Everything that we teach and preach is how to combine the two, overlap the two, so it doesn't take up more of your time. So the topic I'm going to talk about today intertwines with that, of doing both. And the topic is one that I both have conversations with agents about quite often, and also know that it's a conversation that a lot of times doesn't even happen in front of me, which is what the most common misunderstanding about working with sellers on fix and flips are. So the biggest misconception, again, that I talk to agents about, and then I also know the conversation is happening even when I'm not around, is what agents think that looks like. What it looks like when you go out on a seller appointment and present a cash offer, present an investor offer, present a home buyer offer to your seller. And there is a lot of misconceptions with that I'm going to talk about today. But essentially, the high level one is that presenting a cash offer is not a good thing for your seller. It's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. You shouldn't do it. You have a fiduciary responsibility, which you do have. I'm going to talk about that in a second too. And that you should not present a cash offer to your seller because of the fear that it's going to potentially be lower than what they would get if they were going to list it on the market. And this misconception, in my opinion, kind of stems from the belief, true, right or wrong, that a lot of people believe that they know what's right for their seller without necessarily really even asking them. The common misconception is that if I were to sell my house, I would put a little bit of money into it. I would take beautiful pictures. I would list it on the MLS. I would promote the open house. I would go through inspections, and I would get the highest and best possible offer because money is the most important thing to me. And by the way, as an agent myself, if I am working with a seller or I am talking to an agent who has a seller that is willing to go through the listing process, willing to get their house ready, willing to have open houses, willing to negotiate, willing to have an inspection, willing to not know when the closing date is. And if they express that their most important thing with them selling their property isn't convenience, isn't time frame, but it is to get top dollar, in the vast majority of cases, the answer to that is to list your house publicly on the multiple listing service. There is no debate about that coming from my end. It is what we would recommend in most cases. And in fact, even though we buy over 100 homes directly from sellers every single year, in a good amount of times, in the more often than not, when we go into a seller's living room and when we talk to them about how to sell their house, more often than not, we are recommending that they list their property because it fits their needs. Now, remember I said a couple of minutes ago that one mistake that I believe that many agents make is that they themselves, because they themselves would list their property, that's what they would do. They are suggesting that, and not only suggesting it, but really shutting the door to the potential cash offer. Okay. Now, the analogy that I like to give when it comes to this, it is like cars, right? I mean, I can make a million different analogies with this, but some people are going to want to buy a car. They're going to want to buy like a Toyota Corolla. They're going to want to buy a car that runs, that's cost effective, and they want to have the lowest monthly bill as they can because they believe that a car is all about getting from point A to point B, and that spending more money than that on the car is a waste of money because you could then invest that money, or you could save it, or you could spend it on something else. But yet, when we look all around, I'm overlooking right now the parking lot in my office in Wakefield, Massachusetts, yet I don't see all economy cars in my parking lot. In fact, I'm looking out right now, I see a Mercedes and I see an Acura and I see some more expensive cars out there. And those people who bought those cars knew that those weren't the most cost-effective cars. And I bet you that if you asked them if it was a great financial decision to buy that more expensive car, they would probably admit that it's not. And they understand that, and yet they've made that decision. It's the same thing when it comes to selling a property, which is that, in my opinion, your job as a real estate agent and as a fiduciary is to try to seek to understand what is in the best interest of your client and explain to them in honest and an ethical way what their options are when it comes to selling their property. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it isn't about what we think they should do. It's about the option that makes the most sense for them that they decide on, right? So when I say all of that, when we go and we talk to sellers, and more often than not, we recommend that they list their property rather than selling to us, we are going in there and we are trying to seek to understand their specific situation. I mean, hey, we all know that is the mark of a good salesperson, right? The mark of a good salesperson is to try to understand the other person and provide them with a solution, right? And hey, if you have multiple options, if you can list, if you can sell cash, if you've got multiple ways for them to sell their home, well, isn't that a good thing? Isn't it a good thing rather than just have a bunch of Toyota Corollas out on the road? If the Toyota Corolla is the only car that we can buy, we only have one option. I don't own a Toyota Corolla, by the way. And I understand that that's not necessarily the best economical decision, but I don't own one. I've got two vehicles. Neither of them are economy vehicles, right? Even though I know that that's the better financial decision. So to me, it's all about options, and it's not about you as the agent. Like, your fiduciary responsibility is not to tell somebody what to do without listening to them. It is to help them. It is to help them with whatever they need help with, however they need help, and going into it with a sincere and honest manner. And when I say that, my first ever investment deal that I did, I was a real estate agent. I got a referral. So a friend of a friend, 13 Cameron Ave in Somerville, Massachusetts. It's what my real estate brokerage is named after. I went out on that appointment. I met with the woman. She grew up in the property. I was walking around the property. It was packed to the brim with stuff. As an agent, I thought, hey, she should list her house, right? And I did everything within my power. I was a young agent. I was 26 years old at the time. And I tried to get everything I could to get her to list my house. That's what I thought I was supposed to do. And she kept saying the same thing over and over to me, which is that I know my house has potential. I know it needs work. I know I'm a hoarder. I don't want anybody in my property. I want nobody. I don't want my neighbors knowing what my house looks like. I don't want strangers in my property. And I want to choose the closing date. Like, I don't want to have to worry about anything else. And the funny thing is, even after she told me that, I still tried to get her to list the house because I didn't have any other solution, right? The only tool that I had in my tool belt was a listing. And I mean, how was I going to go out and get somebody to buy her property without going inside? I mean, that concept didn't even make sense to me. Long story short, a lot of you that have followed me for a while know this story because I've told it over and over again. But long story short, me and my partners, we ended up flipping this house. We got the seller the price that she wanted, the type of sale that she wanted, and we made a profit. So what do we call that? We call that a win-win. I mean, I think all of us would agree that it's good to have win-win situations where both people are happy. That seller knew full well that more likely than not, if that property was fully marketed and she cleaned out all her stuff, and we had a huge open house because it was in a very attractive area of Boston, she probably would have done a little bit better price-wise, but she wanted nothing of it. And what a lot of agents, sometimes they don't run into these situations all that often because, again, it's not the most common situation. If you have 10 seller appointments, 1 or 2, or at best 3 are even going to be candidates to sell directly to a home buyer. That's the truth, right? Most of the time when you go in there and if you present a cash offer as an option, they're going to say, no, it doesn't work for me. I heard what you said. I heard all about the benefits, but I'd rather try to get the most amount of money. And that's great. That's options. That's giving somebody another option. But it is, in my opinion, a worthwhile thing to have multiple options and to let the seller decide educatedly. I know that's not a word, but kind of like that word. I like how I might trademark that word, educatedly, meaning that you educate them and then they make a decision. Because there are a lot of benefits to selling to a home buyer. And a lot of those benefits are things that in most cases people don't necessarily always need. But there are, I could tell stories all day long about different situations. I'll tell another one quickly. I pulled up, this is when I was on the road. I pulled up to a house in Stoneham. I think it was 53 Oak, something like that. Actually, I'm actually curious. How good is my brain from that long ago? 53 Oak, Stoneham, Mass. Yep, I will. I'll give myself some credit there. 53 Oak, Stoneham, Mass. This is a property you could put it into Zillow. You could look it up. We flipped it. We bought it for $530 in 2015 in February of 2015, and then we resold it for $712 in August of 2015. So I went on that appointment in maybe October or November of 2014. And I showed up. If you put that into Google, 53 Oak Street in Stoneham, what you're going to see is you're going to see a really nice, big, beautiful property in a nice area of a suburb outside of Boston. Grand staircase, beautiful. And when I walked into that house, I met with the sellers, sat at their in their living room, and I literally told them, I said, thanks for calling me out here. Obviously you toured me around. I'm looking at the property. It's a really nice house. It doesn't need a ton of work. It's just not a house that is going to make sense to sell to me. And I could see the wife was getting a little bit mad, and she started, kind of firing back a little bit in a polite way, but she was annoyed. And she said, if I wanted you to come out here and list my house, I would have called somebody else. I want to know what the cash offer is. So we made her a cash offer. I thought they would never accept it in a million years, and they did. And when I got to the closing table to buy that property, I said, why did you sell to us? Like, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. And she said, well, the reality of our situation was that we're older. Our daughter moved to Texas. For the past 5 years, my husband has been telling me that we're going to move to Texas. And I've been begging him because I've got grandchildren there now. And every year that goes by, we still haven't moved. And recently he had a heart attack. And as soon as he got out of the hospital, it was a minor heart attack, but as soon as he got out of the hospital, I think they were in their like early 70s. She said, I told him, I said, I'm calling somebody up. We're not spending another winter in New England. And if we get a reasonable price, we're gone. Right. And the situation there was, first of all, they were both, they both were both attorneys. They both did well. They had a lot of equity. They were going to buy in Texas, which back then, over 10 years ago, was a lot cheaper. So they could buy something substantial there. And they didn't need every last penny. And this was a life decision. This was a decision. We're done. We want to be done now. We've made the decision. And we're mentally already in Texas. And we want to be there. We don't want to spend one more winter here. And again, going back to the misconception of all of this stuff is, again, we could have said, hey, well, you could have got a little bit more. You could take your time. You can get your house ready. Oh, and by the way, there are a lot of benefits of selling to a cash investor, but they left so much stuff because they had a huge house. It was, let's see, I'm on Zillow now. It was a 4,726 square foot house. So they left a lot. They didn't want to bring a lot to Texas. Who would? And they didn't want to have to spend the time, cleaning it out. They took their valuables. They took their sentimental stuff. And they left a lot of stuff behind that they didn't want to deal with. So sometimes it's as simple as that. And again, for them, that made sense. For them, that made a lot of sense. And I could tell, 50 different types of stories. And sometimes, yes, it's almost like sometimes sellers absolutely need to sell to home buyers. And all the signs point to it. And it's almost like this, we're the only types of people that can buy their property. And those are like the obvious ones that a lot of people think about. But then there's a lot of other ones that are more subtle, where they look, the seller, and they say, yeah, I know I could test the waters. I know I could do this repair. I know I could have that inspection. I know I could net more, but I don't want to. Right. And so, my thing for a lot of agents who will use the, fiduciary responsibility part of it or unethical, some people will say what I do sometimes is unethical. It's unethical to provide somebody with multiple benefits and multiple solutions, educating them on them, and then letting them decide. No, it's not. That is not even debatable, right? I'm going to tell one last quick story just to prove the point. But again, I could tell stories all day. We had a seller in Natick, Massachusetts, grew up in the property, didn't have a job, had full equity, inherited the house, had been living in the house for a while. House was getting to be too much to take care of. He wanted to sell and he wanted to rent. Okay, great. That was what he wanted to do. So we went out there and he said, hey, I'm having an issue. I don't have a job, so nobody will rent to me. So what we did as a fix and flip business is we talked to the place, we talked to the landlord of where he wanted to rent, and we said, hey, this person's selling their property. They're going to come into a lot of money. I know he doesn't have a job. We're going to front you 2 years of his rent. What landlord won't do that? Now, we fronted those 2 years of rent before we closed on the property. Now, my thing to the agents who would say, well, what you're doing is unethical. Wait, hold on 1 second. We help that person achieve their goals in a way that, guess what? No traditional agent is going to do. No traditional agent is going to say, all right, yeah, I know this listing is going to work out well. Let me put up $50K and I'll get reimbursed back at the closing. Like, that's something an investor does. That's something a flipper does. And those are the types of things that we do. Like, it's not always as simple as, oh, the house needs work. They want to sell in a more simple fashion. In some cases, we come up with, I would call them, they would be defined as creative solutions. To me, they're not super creative, but they're just things that are outside the box, outside the norm, outside of what most people can do. So with all of that being said, we talked about in the beginning, like the need, like diversify your income. Partnering with us on Fix and Flips is a way to do it, right? How would you feel if now it's March 31st, 2026, you thought you were going to have 7 or 8 closings this spring, and now you're only going to have 4. But you partner with us on the flip, and you made $30,000 or $40,000 extra. Now, whether those closings happen in April or May or September or October, yeah, of course, you'd rather have them happen earlier, but you don't need them to happen earlier, right? You've got that big chunk of income from the flip, right? So there are so many different, and I named, right now the Iran war. By the time that this is released, the Iran war could be over. The situation can be different, but what will always be true is there are going to be geopolitical and economic things that are outside of our control. You are always better off diversifying your income. Just like when you go to a financial advisor and they tell you to diversify your portfolio. Almost no asset manager is going to say, hey, just invest in Coca-Cola, one company, and shut your eyes, because it's risky. It's the same thing with being an agent, right? It is risky. And it's why, like, if you've ever had anxiety about your closings coming up, like, that's why. You would feel much, much different if, in addition to your commission income, you also had flip income. And then with those big chunks of income from your flip income, you bought some passive assets that paid you every single month. So, what I said today, to me, it's not an earth-shattering thing. It's not something like, I think for most people who listen, it'll make logical sense. But I do think for most agents, you need to then put that into action, right? So if you want to learn more about partnering with us, how that works, how to be an agent investor, how to diversify your income, go to my most recent on-demand webinar at www.partnerwithagentinvestor.com. Again, that's www.partnerwithagentinvestor.com. And we'll go through how to do all of this in much, much more detail than what I did today. Today's purpose was, just to highlight, hey, in uncertain times, bulletproof yourself with multiple streams of income. And also, don't let what you think should happen with your seller dictate what they do. Give them options. It is a good thing for them to have options. We all know this, economic, 101, economics 101, like, don't have just one option, have multiple options in the marketplace. Learn more on how to do that by going to www.agentinvestorevent.com. And, I'll go into more detail. But thank you guys for tuning in today. Hope you got some value out of this. You know where to reach me. You ever have any questions, friend request me, follow me on Facebook, and shoot me a DM. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.